Good morning. It is 7:57 a.m. on Sunday, April 28th, 2019, East Coast US time. I'm Christiana Ellis and I just woke up. This is 5 more minutes and I am, as you can see, back home after traveling a long time yesterday. I was very sleepy yesterday getting back, but I managed to stay up well enough that I slept reasonably well last night. And, I'm sure it will be up to a week perhaps before I really feel readjusted to the time zone. But here I am back in the States, back at home. It feels good. But because today is Sunday, I'm going to continue my uh, tradition plan. I don't know, of rewatching Gravity Falls with season 2, episode 2, Into the Bunker. This episode is a big episode for the overall series arc plot, but also a very significant one for a character subplot that we've been dealing with for a long time, which of course is Dipper's crush on Wendy. So if you haven't rewatched the episode recently like I just did, the basics of the episode are Dipper, now freshly armed with his knowledge that using a blacklight on the journal gives him new clues, plans to pursue what seems to be a secret bunker, perhaps a bunker belonging to the author of the journal, below the tree where he found the journal in the first place. Seems like a reasonable place to check, sir. But we open the episode with him at Wendy's house, and they're watching old sort of bad, scary movies, including one about zombies, which they observe is not as scary once you have actually fought real zombies, which is fun. But of course, what we set up the episode here with is yet another repetitive beat on this whole thing of he has a crush on her. He's been wanting to try to tell her, but he is shy, scared, embarrassed, not sure. But one of the things that I think is notable about the way the whole thing plays out is that, as I've talked about before during this rewatch, I think we as the audience are meant to understand that this is not like a slow burn where we're supposed to really be hoping for them to get together romantically. It's kind of like she says later, it's just we look at the two of them and we can say, I think you're better friends than boyfriend girlfriend. And yeah, so I think we're meant to see that. But of course, Dipper's his unrequited crush here is certainly meant to be relatable. And I think in some ways, even though I like how things resolve here, it's interesting because I think just in the last few years, the zeitgeist has maybe started to come around on that whole trope of the friend zone. That idea where, the toxic version of what the friend zone is this idea that somehow the woman is to blame for stringing a guy along and wanting to only be friends, and to essentially rely on the emotional labor of the guy but not give him what he really wants, that sort of whole idea. When, of course, obviously no one is owed romantic attention, and if the implication is that the only reason that a guy might be a girl's friend is because he's hoping for it to be more, and if he was told that it would never be more, that he would not want to be friends with her, well, then that guy is the shitty friend. Anyway, I'm glad that I think that as a culture, we're starting to move past that dynamic a little bit. You still see it in lots of places, but for, up to this point, and, that's kind of little bit been where this dynamic with Dipper's crush has been, is this idea of he does like her as a friend. He does want more, and he's afraid of ruining the friendship. But see, that's kind of the key component here, is he's afraid of ruining the friendship. It's not just a matter of, well, if I follow her around long enough, maybe she'll eventually like me, that sort of thing. And I think that it's resolved in a way that I think teaches kind of a good lesson. But, you know, it's complicated, and I think people's feelings when it comes to these sorts of romantic entanglements are complicated, right? And so, you know, even though we finished this episode, you know, so let's, you know, that's where we start the episode. So we'll talk through the story. So in the meantime, though, Dipper, in failing to tell Wendy about his crush, he does finally, he does instead ask her to come along on this adventure. And she is stoked because that sounds awesome. And she does actually prove, even though, you know, Susan and Mabel are surprised to see her along just because Wendy hadn't been invited previously. But, you know, she is all in on the adventure, and she is quite helpful. You know, she manages to reach the hidden lever on the tree by using the lumberjack belt climbing tree thing, which is very cool, even though it seems unlikely that the belt she takes from around her waist would allow her to scale this tree, which is clearly like much bigger than she is. So it's like, how long is her belt? But okay, fine. It's still pretty cool. And, you know, she's, you know, brave and resourceful and thoughtful, and very much an asset to the adventuring team for sure, which is kind of cool. And I think in a lot of ways, you know, like the episode, because it's running on this background tension of Dipper's crush on her, it's showing her to be extra awesome in this episode, right? That makes sense. In the meantime, though, we also have the actual mystery of what is in this bunker. And the thing that is that we know from seeing other scenes that there is another bunker beneath the Mystery Shack, and that's the one that Stan has been going down into. And we are curious then, like, so what is this other bunker? Is it connected somehow, like some huge underground complex? Is it it seems to be abandoned, except that it has a can of food that seems to be recently opened. And so it's interesting because the impression we get is that it's perhaps a backup emergency bunker, like it's a secondary bunker, or I don't know, it's not super clear. Anyway, lots of mysterious equipment, but all looks kind of abandoned. And that's where we get them going through various, you know, security apparatus, various traps and so on that are pretty cool and surprisingly dangerous, I think. So we see the kids going through that, and they make their way into the area. But in the meantime, Mabel, who can read her brother like a book, absolutely says, so Dipper, you invited Wendy to come with us because you have a crush on her and you still haven't told her, and you should confess the truth. You'll feel better, that sort of thing. And it's interesting, it's kind of nicely nuanced that on the one hand, Wendy's advice is probably more or less correct, in the sense that letting the tension simmer and then eventually possibly fester is not good. That's not a good idea. So being more honest probably is a good idea. But she is also very pushy about it in a way that is probably not super helpful. And as she realizes, inadvertently puts Dipper and Wendy into actual danger because she's being so pushy and not listening to Dipper's protests, and inadvertently lets them, leaves them in there trapped with what turns out to be a monster. So So I think it's nice in the episode to be able to deal with the emotion. This show that's a kid's cartoon, to deal with the complexity of, it's not that her advice is wrong, but being so pushy about it and so aggressive in trying to force Dipper to take her advice. It's one thing to say when you need someone to give someone a little bit of nudge or encouragement, but this idea of, I'm going to lock you two into a closet together and not let you out until you do what I say, that's over the line. That's not a gentle nudge. That's not encouragement. That is extortion. And she's clearly doing it not for Dipper's benefit, but because she wants to play matchmaker or something. In any event, we have Dipper and Wendy trapped in this little, what appears to be a sort of a decontamination airlock before they go into this laboratory. And then they find what seems to be a monster, and then would seem to be, a character who, mysterious old man, is this the author? He claims to be. And he's impressive enough to begin with. And it's also kind of cool that Mark Hamill, a.k.a. Luke Skywalker, a.k.a. voice actor supreme, is the voice of the old man. And there's a very cool dynamic where this moment of realization we get, where we've been given a couple of hints that there's a shapeshifter about, but then Wendy realizes, wait, this person holding the we've given the journal looks just like the guy on this can of beans. Oh my God, it's the shapeshifter. I mean, that's a cool. Hello, welcome. Thank you for the like. So that reveal is pretty cool. It's not like they hold out the tension of, we're dealing with a shapeshifter very long, but it's a nice way for them to realize it. And the realization that now that they have given the journal to the shapeshifter can turn into whatever it sees. And so it's seeing all of these different types of monsters in the journal, giving it sort of more of an arsenal of things to turn into, which is kind of cool. And it's clearly malevolent. And, when they briefly see its real form, that's appropriately horrific looking. And so then it becomes, this effort where, everyone has to try to team up to stop the shapeshifter, and it's effective stuff. It's good fighting, and teamwork and all of that good stuff. I like a lot of it. And then of course we get to the kind of the nice classic bit where the shapeshifter has turned into one of the gang, and we say, but which one is it? Right? But in this case, it's turned into Wendy. And when Dipper is trying to make that classic genre trope choice, which one is the real Wendy and which one is the shapeshifter, it's a nice little wrinkle that the two present him, one with kind of a, hey, wink, wink, smile, that whole sort of like, maybe I could be the Wendy of your dreams, that would return your affections. But then the other one, the real one, gives him that little, zipping and locking and throwing away the key, like that whole little gesture that they have done with each other a couple of times, which is not a sort of romantic, come on, but is an indication that they do actually know each other really well. And so it's great because it's not only the rational choice of trying to actually choose the shapeshifter, because clearly he would want to save the real Wendy anyway, but it also just on, like on the actual surface of it, it makes him choose between a romantic Wendy and a friendship Wendy, which is kind of cool. And this, of course, happens immediately after he realizes he has accidentally confessed, because he sees what seems to be an unconscious Wendy and unresponsive. And so he wails that, like, oh no, I've gotten her hurt or whatever. And I didn't even get to tell her that I loved her. And that's when, of course, we reveal, oh, wait, the real Wendy's standing behind him. What? And then, of course, that leads to the whole fight. But I think it's that nice moment where he does actually get to have that, a choice that works on a couple of different levels like that. So, of course, he guesses correct, and he is right. And so they force the shapeshifter back into the freezing tube. They refreeze it, and it warns Dipper that's like, oh, you'll regret this, blah, 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 blah. And, this will be your final form. And as it's freezing, it shifts into Dipper's shape. And so I think there's a bit of animation that doesn't quite have exactly the effect that they meant it to, because I think it's meant to be like a rack focus shot where we see inside the tube the shapeshifter turning into Dipper's form and freezing, and then it would be focusing. So what we're seeing is Dipper's reflection in the glass as he's looking at it horrified. But I think the animation of it doesn't quite work. It's a little confusing. Anyway, so they have thankfully refrozen the shapeshifter. They seem to have not found much in the way of clues to the author, except, of course, the shapeshifter suggesting that six-fingered guy, and that he hasn't been himself for 30 years or so. And so what does that mean, right? So in the meantime, everyone's coming back out. Seuss and Mabel go off for a hero's breakfast, which apparently will consist of putting syrup on cereal. Sure. And then we have sort of the denouement with Dipper and Wendy. And I think that the show really handles it very sort of smartly. One, which is to say, Wendy's not stupid. She knew. And so, thanks, Sohail. Says, thanks for this. Stop watching Gravity Falls at this episode or the next. Yes, definitely finish up. This is a great series. It's only, you've only got like another, 15 episodes, or no, I guess it's 17 after this. I can't remember. I can't math right now, but the season 2 is great. So you should definitely finish it up, and you either rewatch along with me or whatever. But so anyway, back where I was finishing up in terms of so Wendy's not stupid. She knew Dipper had a crush on her. Like, she is older and more experienced with this stuff than he is. And he's frankly not super subtle about it. He's not hard to read. And she basically just says, well, of course I knew. Like, you think I can't hear you when you're muttering all this stuff under your breath all the time? And she was trying not to, hurt his feelings about it. She was trying to basically say, he didn't mean for me to know that, so I'm going to not, embarrass him about it. But now that it's all out in the open, I like that she tries to let him down easy as much as she can, which is just to say, I'm flattered. I do like you, but not like that. And it's just a fact. I'm too old for you. You see that, right? and I think that's part, like what I was saying, at the beginning of this episode, I was talking about, I think we as the audience are always meant to understand that, sure, he has a crush and that's relatable, but that doesn't mean they should actually be together. And I think she's just very, she is gentle, but not ambiguous. She basically says, I was really bored this summer until you guys showed up. You're a lot of fun. I enjoy doing these things with you. and it's very fun. I would like to still be your friend. And he's like, I thought, Mabel said confessing would make me feel better. And she's like, well, how do you feel? And he says, oh, I'm anxious, I'm afraid, I'm itchy. And she's like, don't be itchy. It's like, okay, maybe it will be a little bit awkward because you have these conflicting feelings. But as she points out, is like, I just wrestled myself. You managed to defeat this monster. Are you going to tell me you can handle that, but you can't handle feeling a little bit awkward? And I think that is a great lesson delivered gently, which is to just say, sometimes I think we avoid awkwardness as though it is real physical danger. When in general, awkwardness is a natural byproduct of sort of being emotionally vulnerable, which is something that risks hurt, but is necessary for greater intimacy, whether that intimacy is romantic or friendship based. And so I think that it's a nice way to sort of cap off that storyline in a way that short circuits the whole sort of friend zone trope. I mean, and that's not to say that Dipper's feelings can be turned off like a light switch. It's going to be awkward. But I think that she basically says unambiguously, I'm not interested in you romantically, period. I'm too old for you. That's just not going to happen. But I would like to continue hanging out with you and being friends if you're willing to do that. And because Dipper is actually a good kid and does value their friendship, he recognizes that even though he doesn't get all the things that he wanted in terms of a romantic relationship, he does actually value her friendship and does not want to lose that and would rather deal with the slight emotional awkwardness of that dilemma than to blow it all up because he's pissy about not getting what he wanted. And so I think that's a great lesson. So obviously, like the main A plot of the episode, we get a few more clues about the journal's author. And, turns out Seuss found this old janky laptop. It says property of F on it. Who's F? We'll see. And so, we get a little bit more development on that stuff. But I think the real meat of the episode, is to support kind of closing that emotional, that subplot to an extent. And I think that it's one of the things, honestly, that I found very memorable about the show, because, cartoons and kids shows in general, and like not just kids shows, like all of media is just full everywhere of these sorts of friend zone plots. And I think they're rarely handled as gracefully as this one manages to land it. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and leave it here for today. But later this evening, let's see, I'm trying to think, from 5 to 7 p.m., me and the Beyond the Wall crew are going to be recording our, Beyond the Wall, Game of Thrones podcast. So that'll be happening. You can watch us live, discuss the last episode as we get ready for the next episode. And then immediately after that, at about 7 p.m. Eastern Time, I'm going to be talking about Survivor with my friend Mike, where we talk about the last 2 weeks worth of Survivor Edge of Extinction. And, then that'll be it for my podcasting activities today. So I'll leave it there, and I'll talk to you all tomorrow for 5 more minutes.